Welcome to Season 4 of Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm Josh Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement and a former Commissioner of Health in Baltimore City. Our goal is to bring scientific evidence and experience to current topics in public health through engaging interviews with scientists, community leaders, policy experts, public health officials, clinicians, and more. If you have ideas or questions for us to cover, please email us at publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Today, I speak to Dr. Mamie Parker, an ecologist, activist, and the first Black head of fisheries for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We speak about getting back in touch with nature during the pandemic. Let's listen. Dr. Mamie Parker, thank you so much for joining me on Public Health on Call today.
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And I'm just so grateful for the work that you've done to really get the word out and make a difference.
Well, we were on this panel together and you were talking about how the pandemic should really open our eyes to the relationship that we have to nature around us. And I just thought, what a message. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I was born in Southern Arkansas. My mom was an avid angler and she had 11 children. I'm number 11. And because my father had another family on the other side of the track and I was his illegitimate love child, my mother took me fishing to really get me away from some of what she thought would be a hard life. So I fished with her and I spent time in the outdoors. And ninth grade, I found Marvin Gaye's song, Mercy, Mercy Me. And that song talked about the environment and it talked about mercury in the fish we eat. And I thought to myself, well, I eat a lot of fish because that was a protein in my diet. And so from then on, he charged us to go and do something for, to make nature better. He talked about the pollution in the air. And so I was inspired to do that. And so I went to work for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as an intern and then worked for them in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Missouri, Massachusetts, and became head of fisheries in this country over time.
That is really an incredible story. And I know that you have, experienced such joy and knowledge from the natural world. And here in the pandemic, one of the perhaps unanticipated consequences that people have been spending a lot more time outside. As soon as we all heard that the virus doesn't transmit as well outside, people spending more time in parks, more time on hikes. As someone who has been an advocate for getting more in touch with the natural world, what's that experience been like for you?
Well, it's been very rewarding, as you can imagine, my brother, simply because 40 years ago, when I worked in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and when I worked in Columbia, Missouri, we were trying very hard to save large pockets of land so people could enjoy them. And most folks did not make that connection. And then when I saw all of these individuals out there really enjoying nature, it just brought back so many great memories for people like me. And I know that had they not been able to get outside, there would have been a lot more problems inside, right? In our homes and everywhere, because you could go for a nice walk to a park or whatever. And so it just reminded me, and I tell this story all of the time, going back when I was younger, in the ninth grade, my mother took me fishing with her, as I said earlier, and I spent time outdoors. And I tell people all of the time, had I not been fishing, I would have been kissing because, the ninth grade girls in my class had babies in the ninth grade. And so it's so important for us to understand that nature offers what we call ecosystem services, whether it's enjoying crabs here in Baltimore. It's because of nature that we have crab, shrimp. What about the wonderful oysters that we get a chance to eat? Nature saved us during that pandemic. It offered us an opportunity to get outside. But even now that we are not outdoors all of the time, nature is there to help us. Pollinators are so important.
Well, I want to ask. So now that nature has our attention, you know, what do you think is important for people to know? And even just taken in an urban environment, what should people be paying attention to?
I think they should be paying attention to the value that it offers and that we've taken it for granted in the past. We should pay attention to when it's being destroyed. We should pay attention to how we benefit from it. And an example of that, I talk about bees, you know, and I talk about plants. Plants are so important when we think about medicine, when we think about all of the values we get from tea. I love coneflowers because they're beautiful in color, but they're echinacea, right? That's the tea that we drink. But they also offer bees and butterfly the habitat that they need to pollinate so we can eat too, you know, healthy food, because that's important. 1 in every 3 bites we take is because of a bee, butterfly, or bird, or a pollinator. So nature saves us in times of pandemics, but it also offers us a lot of ecosystem services when we need it, for sure. So we need to pay a lot more attention of the value of nature and why it's important to our health and our welfare.
And you know that leads you to obviously creating more space for parks, preserving more land. Where else does that go? What are the kinds of things you are advocating for?
So I'm advocating for clean water. We talked about that, and I always mention Flint, Michigan, and how the groundwater there, but it's also important to us to think about water scarcity too. Here in the East Coast, we don't worry about that as much, but you see the folks on the West Coast when they're and all out west where they're fighting for water because it's very scarce there. So I like to promote just small things that we as individuals can do to save nature and save water. When I brush my teeth, there was a time when I left the water running. I put the toothpaste on it, leave the water running forever. Now I know that it's up to gallons of water every day just from brushing my teeth. So we need to think about ways in which we can reduce our water usage. Start early now so we're ready for it when it gets here to the East Coast. That's one great example. Planting trees because of climate change. We've seen our earth get hotter and hotter and hotter, right? And it's simply because we have substituted a lot of concrete for the trees that were once there. So we need to go back and look at ways in which we could help plant trees to cool our earth. That's really important. Finally, we need to save our wetlands because wetlands offer us 3 things. And those are swamps, you know, like lands that are there. They're like filters. If you think about it, they filter some of the trash before it gets to our water bodies. They're like sponges, you know. I'm thinking about things in my kitchen now, too. They're like sponges, too, because they absorb some of the water so we don't get flooding in our communities. Here in Baltimore, in particularly, there's lots of flooding that happens here. And what we need to do is to recreate some nature and some wetlands so that they will be able to absorb some of the water in the problems. And then they're like soap. They clean a lot of the water before it goes into our water bodies. And again, we want to have healthy water. Plastics. I try to tell people how we shouldn't use a lot of plastics and dispose our plastics smartly too. We don't always do that. And because eventually it ends up in our fish, and what happens? We eat some of that. And so plastic pollution in our bodies is something we need to be certainly concerned about.
So these are all things, if we want to pay back to nature for what nature has given us during the pandemic, these are some really concrete ideas that every individual can do.
Every individual. And when I was head of fisheries in this country, we worked with the American Pharmaceutical Association to promote a campaign now that many are using now. We call it smart disposal. So the last one is, how do we dispose of our pills when we're done with them, right? What do we normally do with them? What do you do? What do they do? What do most
A lot of people
do?
flush them down the toilet.
And we know where they end up, right? They end up in water bodies. And we've seen signs of that in some water bodies. So we need to be really careful and look for ways to be smart about disposing our medicines as well.
One of the aspects of respecting nature goes beyond what individuals can do and really talks about like the broader issues of preservation. Some people pointed out that there's a lot of stress on bats because of development and human encroachment, and bats have all these different viruses. And so, part of this is avoiding, frankly, another pandemic.
That's been amazing and that's been one of the hardest messages that I've been able to give, though, because to tell people in my community and in many of our communities how important bats are has been kind of difficult, but they're pollinators too. And now they've gotten a bad rap, of course. But bats are also, as I said, they pollinate a lot of plants too and make sure that they're there for our food and our medicine and all of that. And our meat too. I didn't talk about that. But bats in particular, we know, and we're getting research that when they have no habitat that they're accustomed to, and they need the carrying capacity that they need to live upon, when they are stressed out, their immune system suffers. Viruses that are in their bodies, they excrete that. And that's what we understand. And we're still doing research on this, how it ends up in the atmosphere. And we end up encountering those kinds of health issues ourselves. So again, it's tied to nature. We need to save those trees. And we need to be smarter about how we go about cutting trees and replanting them and looking for ways to make sure we're strategic.
Well, I can tell you are evangelical about this. You want people to feel the same passion for the environment that you do. And I am starting to feel this right now. I'm thinking about plastic in my own life a little bit more carefully already. But I'm curious how the congregation is responding. Like, do you feel like people are hearing this message during the pandemic?
I think during the pandemic has been a great time. It's so easy for us to think about what's bad about the pandemic, but I like to think that the pandemic is all about basically reflecting, and doing some refreshing and restarting. And so people have had time to think about climate change. They've had time to think about nature more and appreciate it. And because of that, I have seen a more positive response to it. Also, businesses have realized that they need to protect nature too, because they rely on it. We're all in this game together. If you think about it, my brother, think about, when I go to LabCorp to get my lab work done, they can't give me dirty water to do my work. They need clean water, right? So, they want to do better. When we think about the paper industry, they need trees too. And so when the trees are burning out west, they want to determine ways to avoid that as well. So what I've learned from this is that more people are interested, but we are the ones that have to do a better job as messengers to make sure we break it down and make it real to them. And that's why we need all sectors of our society to help us do that. All socioeconomic communities involved in this battle as well.
Dr. Parker, it has been such a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. And again, keep on spreading the word.
Oil wasted on the oceans and upon our seas, fish full of mercury. Oh, mercy, mercy me.
Public Health On Call is produced by Josh Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by Spencer Greer, Niall Owen McCusker, Cian Oates, and Matthew Martin with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo and Neiman Outland. Social media support from Brenda Haggader, Grace Holes Fernandez, and Caroline Wong. Thank you for listening.
What about this overcrowded land? How much more we use from sand?